Hello everyone, Fred here. In this installment of TPP Dynamite, I'm going to be reviewing Episode 8 of She-Hulk Attorney at Law, Ribbit and Rip It. First things first though, if you haven't already, let me encourage you to subscribe to my channel. I'm an author of adult and young adult mystery novels. To date, I've released 3 books, The Women in White, The Lethal List, and most recently, Textbook Murder. All of them are on sale now, and there are purchase links in my video description below. With that in mind, and without further ado, welcome to my spoiler-filled review of She-Hulk Attorney at Law's Episode 8, Ribbit and Rip It. She-Hulk gets a visit from a guy named Eugene Patilio, a spoiled rich kid who masquerades as a superhero called Leapfrog. Eugene recently bought a suit from Luke Jacobson and used it in a failed attempt to stop a robbery. When he realized that he was outmatched, he tried to fly away, only for his suit's engines to malfunction and badly burn his legs. Eugene wants to sue Luke for damages now. She-Hulk is hesitant to antagonize Luke since he's the only tailor who can make her a dress for the Female Lawyer Awards Gala. Holden Holloway, of course, is completely unsupportive of her situation and insists that Jen take the case since Eugene's father is an important client of the firm's and specifically wants a Hulk on his son's case. She-Hulk tries settling out of court with Luke, but he grows angry with her for even intimating that he could have made a defective suit and refuses to finish making her dress. During the trial, it turns out that Luke is being represented by Matt Murdock. I guessed as much as soon as I saw Luke introduced in the scene without counsel, but it still didn't stop me from cheering when I actually saw him stroll in and joke about having trouble finding parking. Jen argues for the releasing of Luke's client list in order to determine if others might have gotten a defective suit from Luke in the past, but Matt argues against it, saying that the Sokovia Accords have been overturned and that revealing Luke's clients' names could compromise their safety as superheroes and that of the people in their lives. Matt, of course, has a personal investment in that he is one of Luke's clients. Just a little aside here, I don't exactly get how keeping the list secret would do very much by way of protecting Luke's clients when Luke's name is now known widely as a superhero costume designer because of the public nature that I'm assuming goes along with this sort of case that's being litigated in court right now. Anyway, the judge denies She-Hulk's counterclaims, then Matt, because of his enhanced senses, detects that Eugene used jet fuel for his suit's engines, which was strictly against Luke's instructions for the use of the suit. This proves Luke's innocence, and the judge dismisses Eugene's case against Luke. Jen drowns her sorrows in a bar later, where Matt finds her and offers her a peace pipe in the form of an appropriately green appletini. They have a friendly chat, they get along, their chemistry is off the charts, and Matt gives Jen some valuable advice that'll probably shape her superhero career moving forward, even though this is the show's penultimate episode and there's no word yet on a second season. He says that Jen has the potential to help people as a lawyer when society fails them and as She-Hulk when the law fails them. This is basically the same advice that Jen has gotten and turned down from assorted friends and colleagues over the course of the past 7 episodes. But for whatever reason, this time it seems to stick because reasons. Maybe because it's the penultimate episode and the writers need to move things along. Maybe because Jen has the hots for Matt. We may never know. Matt gets called away from the bar on some other business. Jen gets a call from Todd Phelps, who wants to meet her for drinks to discuss a new case. Jen goes as She-Hulk to meet him. Todd, in his usually casually racist, lecherous, and crass way, informs Jen that he bought a vibranium spear from an auction, but that Wakandans are insisting that it be returned because it was stolen from them by colonizers. He says that he wants She-Hulk's help in securing his own rights to the spear, but then he starts sexually harassing She-Hulk. She-Hulk then storms off and refuses him her help. Just about as soon as Jen gets back to her apartment, she gets a call from Eugene, who says that he's in his car and is being attacked by a mysterious man. She-Hulk, being inspired by Matt, puts on the super suit that Luke made for her and goes to save Eugene. The man pursuing Eugene turns out to be Daredevil. She-Hulk charges right in and attacks Daredevil, despite that he tries to tell her that she doesn't understand and is making a mistake. Jen really overreacts here, to be honest. This is her first time even seeing Daredevil, and she destroys an entire parking lot chasing him, then tries to straight up murder him by chucking a frickin' car at it. I also wonder how she doesn't immediately recognize Matt when Daredevil speaks with that very distinctive accent of his, the British voice that's trying to be American. Anyway, She-Hulk eventually strikes Daredevil down and unmasks him, revealing him to be Matt. Matt then tells her that he was trying to save Luke from Eugene, and that after the trial, Eugene kidnapped Luke to force Luke into making more suits for her. Jen then agrees to team up with Matt to rescue Luke. Luke is being held by Eugene in a hideout that Eugene is calling the Lily Pad, and being guarded by goons whom Eugene calls tadpoles. Daredevil suggests proceeding stealthily and taking out Eugene's people, but She-Hulk insists on a more direct approach because she's invulnerable. Daredevil breaks into the building and fights Eugene's men in an epic hallway scene. That was a perfect and clever little way for the show to pay homage to Netflix's Daredevil, though I do feel like it would have been more impressive had it been shot in one take for old time's sake. Anyway, She-Hulk smashes through the roof and ends the fight by taking out the remaining guards before Daredevil can. She-Hulk and Daredevil free Luke. Eugene attempts to fly away, only to fall to the ground and badly injure himself again. After Eugene is arrested, Jen and Matt talk on a roof. They have a cute little banter. Matt says that he'll be heading back to New York the next day, and he suggests that he could take the clearly infatuated Jen on a dinner date the next time that he's in Los Angeles. Jen suggests that they just skip all of that. She takes him back to her apartment, where they have sex and spend the rest of the night together. Matt, in full costume, leaves Jen's apartment the next morning, carrying his boots in this show's cheeky inversion of the female walk of shame. Nikki arrives to help Jen prepare for the Female Lawyer Awards Gala that night. Jen breaks the fourth wall and hilariously comments about how she thought that the episode came to a very satisfying conclusion, hint hint, wink wink, the night before, and how it should be over now. For all of this show's faults, there are times where it leans into its adult sitcom vein and it hits the ball right out of the park, and this was one of those times. She-Hulk attends the gala with her parents and Nikki. She's surprised when she realizes that she is not the only female lawyer who will be getting an award, and that several other lady lawyers, including Mallory Book, will also be getting an award. I'm not sure why Jen would be surprised that she was only one part of a lineup of recognized lawyers. This is the exact sort of thing that would be publicized well in advance of the event and made known to attendees and honorees. The intelligentsia hijacks a broadcast at the gala just as She-Hulk starts to give her acceptance speech. They expose the personal information that Josh cloned from Jen's phone for everyone at the gala to see. They also publicly reveal a sex tape of Jen with Josh, claiming that She-Hulk is an undeserving slut who stole her power from the Hulk and who doesn't merit anyone's admiration. She-Hulk loses her temper and destroys the broadcasting equipment in full view of the audience, the members of which all flee in terror. Then She-Hulk chases several masked intelligentsia members outside and angrily grabs one of them. Nikki manages to talk She-Hulk out of doing anything drastic to the man, and Jen lets him go. She's too late, however, because damage control agents arrive swiftly on the scene, pointing guns at her to force her to stand down. The end. So, here are my thoughts. First, the good. If you've been following my reviews, then you know that the only reason why I labored through this show was for Charlie Cox's eventual reappearance as Matt Murdock. And I am happy to say that it was well worth the wait in almost every possible way. Charlie Cox first appeared as Matt Murdock in Daredevil in the 2015 through 2018 Netflix series of the same name that ran for 3 nearly perfect seasons. That series is, in my opinion, the best Disney Marvel product to feature on either the big screen or the small screen. It was brilliantly written and shot, it was masterfully well acted, it was gloriously complex, its action style and choreography were and are world class. She-Hulk, by contrast, isn't the worst thing that I've ever watched, but it's also a far cry from the best. It adheres way more to an uninteresting and generally unimaginative pattern that many of the most recent Disney Marvel projects tend to follow. So one of my biggest concerns when I first heard that Charlie Cox would appear as Matt Murdock in one episode of She-Hulk was that the show would ruin it, drag him down and make him conform to some of She-Hulk's own worst patterns, turning him into a joke, using him as a prop for feminist virtue signaling, neutering him like the Hawkeye show did Kingpin several months ago. I could go on. But I'm happy to report, though, that my concerns were mostly ill-founded. Now, Daredevil does joke a bit more here than he did in the Netflix show, and his fight scenes are quite a bit less memorable here than they were in the Netflix show, but the fights are still pretty good. Almost all of his jokes land, only 2 or 3 feel ostentatious, and most importantly, Daredevil is never turned into the joke. Better still, Daredevil is not, and I emphasize not, woke. Disney frustratingly still refuses to confirm or deny whether this Daredevil is the same one from the Netflix series, but it's heavily implied, particularly when the epic old school Daredevil theme is played over Daredevil's self-introduction to Jen, that this is the same character, but just a few years later in his career. And because of that, his overall lighter tone actually makes quite a bit of sense in this episode. By the end of season 3 of the Netflix show, things were looking up for Matt Murdock. He bested his archenemy, the Kingpin. He reconnected with his long-lost mother. He reconnected with his alienated friends. He found his tribe. He found his passion. He won. A few years ago, Charlie Cox himself went on record and said that he was aware of plans for season 4, and that if season 4 had happened, it would have had a lighter tone than the first 3 seasons. So the bottom line is that it makes sense that Matt Murdock, a few years after Netflix's Daredevil season 3, would be something like what we got in this episode. Still brilliantly efficient in fighting, still uncompromising on justice, but just a little bit lighter than he was in seasons 1 through 3 when he was at his worst. One of the good things about Netflix's Daredevil is that it wasn't just a good superhero show, but it was also a pretty amazing lawyer show too. She-Hulk, meanwhile, has, since its second episode, played fast and loose with anything resembling the law, and anything resembling the plot for that matter. So including Matt Murdock and Daredevil in this episode helped to fix that problem and bring She-Hulk up in quality. The lawyering in this episode was more tightly written and makes a modicum of sense. The legal banter between Jen and Matt worked very well. This episode of She-Hulk, in fact, was the first one to feature an interesting legal story and an interesting superhero story, and to feel like a proper superhero sitcom. This show really has been firing on all cylinders these past 2 episodes. The only 2 things that did not work for me with the inclusion of Daredevil were Matt's hookup with Jen and the Daredevil costume itself. To me, the hookup felt like a half step too far. Maybe it would have been better if Matt and Jen had just kissed each other goodbye or exchanged knowing looks that left the rest to the viewer's imagination. I get that the people behind this episode might have wanted to take full advantage of the moment here given that there's no telling when Jen and Matt might run across each other again in the MCU. They may have wanted to leave it all on the field, but still the whole hookup left me feeling like less might have been more between Matt and Jen in this situation. Even so, credit where credit is due, Matt and Jen had outstanding chemistry. Their hookup and its aftermath were played hilariously. And make no mistake, the hookup never felt like it was against the character of Daredevil. The Netflix show established Matt Murdock as a bit of a ladies' man who's naturally good with attractive women. I had no problem believing that even if Jen had been in his show back from 2015 to 2018, he'd have taken his shot with her. I do, however, very much doubt that he'd have risked walking out of her apartment in full costume for everyone to see him do the walk of shame like a college freshman. As far as goes the Daredevil costume, I know that opinions are divided over this, but personally, the red and gold just did not work for me. The black and red Daredevil costume from the Netflix show had its problems, but this new one is just so much worse. It's hard to pinpoint what exactly it is, but the colors for me just don't work very well together, particularly in daylight. I get that it was a classic look in the comics, but some comics costumes just don't work well when portrayed in real life. I honestly believe that the litmus test for how good a super suit looks is how it appears in daylight. In my opinion, the red and gold costume fails that test. In fact, Jen herself jokes on the suit a few times during the episode, and I totally get why. I definitely had my problems with this episode's ending and with the intelligentsia as villains, and I'll definitely be addressing those problems in a minute, but I also felt that the ending of this episode was surprisingly deep and mature. The idea that Josh apparently orchestrated his entire romance with Jen so that he could film her having sex with him, clone her phone, and enable the public release of all of that information to ruin her is evil beyond measure. I really don't think that Jen's reaction was necessarily the wrong one at the gala. Many women, many people probably would have done the same thing under the circumstances. In the first episode, Bruce warned Jen that once people see Hulks as monsters, it never goes away. And because of Jen's reaction, it's clear that plenty of people will probably see her as the monster because of her freak out at the gala, even though it was very justified in my mind. And that whole storyline gives way to some serious but subtle commentary about just how unfairly women and minorities are treated when it comes to anger. When women or people of color get angry, even for good reasons, they're usually seen as unstable. When white dudes do the same thing, the perception tends to be far less extreme. At the gala, She-Hulk reacted with, ironically enough, a normal amount of rage, given that the private contents of her phone and her sex life with another man were broadcast by a hate group to her parents, her bosses, her friends, and several other power players from her social circle, but I have no doubt that come next episode, she will somehow be labeled the villain. She-Hulk Attorney at Law is usually such a careless and shallow show when it comes to the messages that it preaches, but this is the kind of mature and thoughtful storytelling that honestly I would have expected from one of the Netflix MCU shows of times past. It's the kind of thing I'd probably have expected from, say, aka Jessica Jones, which I suspect will be the first and last time that I compare She-Hulk to an award-winning masterpiece like aka Jessica Jones. But I digress. Okay, now the bad. The CGI is once again the bane of this entire episode. There are times where its cringe level is less pronounced than others, but it's still noticeable throughout that this show is, to borrow Jen's turn of phrase, balling on a budget, and an embarrassingly limited one at that. She-Hulk's initial fight with Daredevil was the most glaring example of disappointment in my mind, though most of She-Hulk's appearances in the law firm at the beginning of the episode are up there as well. I cannot overstate how much of a disappointment the intelligentsia has been thus far. In the comics, the group is a complex, formidable, and dangerous collection of some of the smartest criminal masterminds on Earth. In She-Hulk Attorney at Law, the group is basically an unimaginative collection of jealous male incels who seem only to want to ruin Jen because she's powerful and privileged as a woman. The group's master plan appears to revolve around revealing She-Hulk's most embarrassing personal info to the masses and hoping that she'd melt down enough that people would see her as a monster. And sure, like I just said, there's a valid subtextual message there about the dichotomy of how women and minorities get crucified for showing even a little justifiable anger, while white men get away with showing however much they want, whenever they want. But that message just doesn't justify the blanketly horrible way that this show's so-called creative minds have destroyed a well-written and layered part of the source material to fuel what amounts to a few virtue signaling sessions. The whole thing is made all the worse by the fact that She-Hulk Attorney at Law's so-called creative minds have also used the intelligentsia as their means for slipping the finger to audience members who find any fault with the show at all. Many of the rants that are found on the intelligentsia's website are copied and pasted versions of real-world comments that have been critical of the She-Hulk show. Depending on whom you believe, the intelligentsia's masks from this episode were directly inspired by Doomcock, a YouTube personality who has been habitually critical of poorly made, woke Hollywood projects. And in a way, that is the biggest disappointment about the intelligentsia plotline. It's basically just a vehicle for She-Hulk's writing and production team to demonize fans who disapprove of the show's own risky or poor creative choices. It is shallow, it is unimaginatively petty, and I am not here for it. Also, another little aside, I am really beginning to suspect that Todd might either be involved with or masterminding the intelligentsia. This episode made a point of featuring him heavily in the Previously On segment, and he had the worst habit of cropping up throughout the episode to pester Jen, specifically in her She-Hulk form. First by making her meet him for drinks, and later at the gala itself. He has also in the past referred to She-Hulk as quote-unquote a specimen. I really hope that I'm wrong here, mostly because Todd as this show's main villain would be such a monumental letdown considering how little depth there is to him. He's basically written as a rich, entitled, spoiled, stereotypically tone-deaf white boy. And there really isn't enough time to meaningfully deepen that shallow characterization and execute him as a compelling antagonist, given that She-Hulk Attorney at Law will be airing its last roughly 30-minute episode this coming Thursday. Okay, down to brass tacks. She-Hulk Attorney at Law's 8th episode beats out its 7th as the best one so far. Charlie Cox's Daredevil reprisal is a true treat. The creative team, thankfully, gives him the respect that he deserves, and it's all topped off with an admittedly imperfect ending that still leaves me intrigued to see what will come next. I give She-Hulk Attorney at Law Episode 8, Ribbit and Rip It, 3.5 cronuts out of 5. At any rate, tell me what you think in the comments below. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, click subscribe, and please ring that bell. So long.